Hello everyone, this is General Haggerty. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. In today's video we are going to be talking about the next phase of the game that we're playing here. This is the demonstration game of Global War 1914. So in the last video we finished off the spring of 1917 turn, and a lot happened. The Americans declared war. The Russians went to revolution, and that was at the very beginning of the turn. And so that was a big moment in the game, both of those things happening. I thought I'd spend a little extra time talking about the Russian Revolution because there's a lot to do for that. There's a lot, or a little actually. Like there's two ways that you can play it, and we'll get to that. Here, what you're looking at here, this is just where I keep all my stuff for the Revolution and for the prequel. And that's enough stuff for all of the, for everything that I need. I've got all my roundels, and there's some other stuff too. Like I got my import markers in here, the Ukrainian army down over here, and these are my Mexican armies. Anyway, all the markers that I need and everything, I just keep it all in one box. So let's take a look at what's going on over here now. The last time you've seen this, there was a Russian army there, and now there's not. So what are we looking at? Let's get to that in a minute. So what happens at the end of the turn then? Like on the last turn, Russia didn't get a turn. They could have had a turn if they wanted to. They could have non-combat moved. That's all they could have done. They wouldn't have collected any money. They wouldn't have done anything except non-combat move. And what would have been the point of that, right? The only countries that went after them were Italy, Japan, America, and China. And none of those were going to be affected by anything the Russians did. So there was really no point in even taking a Russian turn, right? So then when you get to the end of the round, the Russians collapse in, that's when things start to happen. So before you even do your random events, like normally every round starts with the random events, but before you even do that, you have to resolve the Russian situation. By resolve, I mean you have to set it up for the next phase of the game. So the first thing you would do is you would surrender your IPPs to the Germans. So that's 22 IPPs. And then you would do the setup and everything. And we'll get into that, but let's do the simple solution first. So if there's only two players, I would just recommend that you didn't play with the Russian Revolution or Russian Civil War expansion set. They're basically the same thing. But so if I say one or the other, I do mean both. If you kind of need three or more players to do that, if you want to do it properly. The only way I would do it with two players is if you were teaching yourselves how to play the game and you were doing it like I'm doing it here, where okay, now I'm Russia, so you try hard for Russia. Okay, now I'm Germany, and you try hard while you're the German player. You know what I mean? There's a way of playing the game by yourself. But with two players, though, if you really want to play the game honestly and you're being competitive about it, then you will forego the Russian Revolution expansion set until you have three players or more. Then it will make more sense because as the Soviet player, you are trying to win the game. You're not going to be able to win the war, of course, but you could still win the game. Anyway, what you would do in that case is basically once Russia collapsed, you would just immediately give Germany that money. Like you wouldn't wait till the end of the turn. And then you would take all the Russian units off the board. Any Central Powers that were already in Russia, any units, territories that they have in there, they would leave one unit there. And in each territory, like here is an example. Germany still has 3 artillery and 2 infantry in Congress, Poland. Well, they would have to leave and just leave one unit in here, but they'd have to leave as soon as they could. And the Ottomans have some stuff down in the south there. They would also have to leave, but you do have to leave one unit in that territory for the rest of the game. And what that'll do is you'll be able to collect for that spot on the board, right? So this is worth an IPP. Germany would continue to collect an IPP every turn for the rest of the game when it's time to collect their income. Anyway, so that's one way of playing it. But if you have three or more players, then this could be a lot of fun playing with the Russian Revolution, and it's a lot more historical. And we've taken great pains to do as much as we could to make it as historical as possible. But bear in mind that the Russian Revolution was so complicated, and there were so many players involved that we can only just approximate, like just just do the basics, right? And even the basics makes it's a pretty complicated expansion set still, right? But it is a bit more complicating, and it complicates your game a little bit more for sure. I did get a comment on a recent video. Somebody commented that they liked the way that the Russian Revolution was handled in Axis and Allies 1914 better, because they, in that game, it was depending upon how well Russia was doing in the war. Like if the Russians they met a certain threshold for how badly they were doing, well, then that was it for the Russians. You just took the Russian units off the board, and Russia was no longer a part of the game. And, Axis and Allies is a great game. I played it for, 30 years or more, right? And, I've met Larry Harris. He's a great guy. He's the creator of Axis and Allies. I have a lot of respect for him. But these games that we are making are a little bit more in depth than that. And that's, some people like that, and some people would rather have the simpler game. To address his comment directly, though, the reason that the Russians went to revolution was not because they were doing poorly in the war. One of the factors were that they were in the war to begin with, but that wasn't the sole reason why they went to revolution. Let me explain. So I've already mentioned before in this video series how this war, World War I, was the age of or the end of the age of empires, the end of the age of the monarchies around the world. And, the German Empire fell, the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell, the Ottoman Empire fell. Shortly after the war, the British Empire came to an end and was replaced by the Commonwealth, which was a lot different than the British Empire. But also, the Russian Empire fell as well, and it fell during the war. And the reason that it was probably more notable than the other ones was because of what replaced it, and that was communism. And if you're old enough to have lived through the Cold War, then that's something that sticks with you, and it means something more to you because it was something that affected our lives, right? But all those empires ended. The war was the old world meets the new world, and Russia was very much old world. They did modernize rapidly, but only in small pockets of the country, right? Like it wasn't all over that they were doing that. It was still largely an agricultural country, right? There was not very many roads, infrastructure. And so, like a backwards country would be the best way to explain it, right? The people of Russia were mostly peasants, mostly farmers, but they didn't really own their land. In fact, they didn't own their land. They worked the land. They weren't paid very much, if anything at all. But they worked it for landlords. Let's just call them landlords, right? And it wasn't a good situation that they were all in. So that was bad enough. And then World War I was not something that the people wanted. It didn't benefit anybody. The only one that really wanted it was Tsar Nicholas. And, it was a vanity thing for him, he wanted to be a conqueror, like many monarchs, kings and queens. And he didn't give a shit about his people. He gave a shit about his legacy and about power and very much old world thinking, right? And so in 1915, he actually took control of the Russian army in World War One, and he was not equipped to do that. He was not a general, right? And without those kind of skills, it's one thing to say, I want you to attack here, or I want you to attack there, but understanding logistics and things. I mean, like he'd send thousands of soldiers off, and not as many guns, right? It's just, okay, when this guy falls, you pick up the gun and keep going. Or if you can grab a German gun, that's even better, right? I mean, it was not the way to conduct a war, and he was not very good at it. And to make matters a whole lot worse than that, while he was away at the front, his wife was at home running the country. She was German. And so, they're fighting a war against Germany, and they're being led by a German woman. And so, that led to some suspicion, right? Like, because the country was being run pretty poorly as well. So they kind of thought that maybe she was doing that on purpose. And as if that wasn't bad enough, well, then she had some guy there, some weirdo, some freak, and we all know who he is, Rasputin. This guy was just sick, man. Like, he was just a freak. He was a mystic, right? Anyway, there was lots of rumors that him and the Tsarina, they called her, were having an affair, and like the appointments that were made to government were people that just were not qualified to do jobs, right? And they figured that these two were running the country poorly on purpose, right? Trying to sabotage Russia. And so they murdered him. Of course, that pissed off the Tsarina, right? And she didn't care after that. She just, whatever. She did not address any of the concerns of the Russian government. She just basically booked out, didn't bother doing her job. And the country was on the verge of collapse. Let me just read you this paragraph here. The conditions during the war resulted in a devastating loss of morale within the Russian army and the general population of Russia itself. This was particularly apparent in the cities, owing to a lack of food in response to the disruption of agriculture. Food scarcity had become a considerable problem in Russia, but the cause of this did not lie in any failure of the harvests, which had not been significantly altered during wartime. The indirect reason was that the government, in order to finance the war, printed millions of ruble notes, and by 1917, inflation had made prices increase up to 4 times what they had been in 1914. Farmers were consequently faced with higher cost of living, but with little increase in income. As a result, they tended to hoard their grain and to revert to subsistence farming. Thus, the cities were constantly short of food. At the same time, rising prices led to demands for higher wages in the factories. And in January and February of 1916, revolutionary propaganda, in part aided by German funds, led to widespread strikes. This resulted in a growing criticism of the government, including an increased participation of workers in revolutionary parties. And the Germans, they knew what they were doing, right? Like Lenin, he was in Switzerland. They put him on a train, sent him to Russia. Their secret weapon, they didn't tell him he was on their side or anything. They just sent him home and knew what was likely to happen. So it wasn't just that the war wasn't going that well for them. I mean, even if the war, they were having some success, and then initially they did have success. Just like in this game, they had success here in Galicia, and that's where the Russians had success in our game here, right? And then the Austrians, helped by the Germans, managed to take that back, and slowly but surely they were pushing the Russians back, just like what happened in this game. Amazing how that works, right? I wasn't concerned at the beginning of the game because I knew that was likely to happen. I mean, it's not guaranteed or anything, but likely. But anyway, it's not because the Russians were losing territory in the war. That would have made it worse for sure. There's nothing worse than for your morale than losing a war. But what it really was, more than anything, was that people were starving, and the corruption in the government was just rampant, and they did not seem to be addressing the concerns of the people. I mean, you can only go so long starving before you have to do something. You either die or you revolt, and so the Russian people revolted, and the Russian Revolution was on. And that's a very, very simplified explanation of it. But, it's basically what happened. There's more to say. There's all these personalities and events that happened and everything. But as a very short explanation, that's basically it. So let's get to what we would do here on the next part of our game. Okay, so this is the Russian National Reference Sheet. This is page 1, and it explains the Russian collapse here, what happens, and then what you're supposed to do. So on E here, this is the last one. That's if you weren't going to play with the expansion set. If you were just going to do the simple one like I talked about, where you just take the units off the board. One thing I didn't mention, and this is what you do for both scenarios, is if you flip this over, you'll see there's the victory objective. So these are the Soviet ones here that you would be using if you were playing the expansion set. And this is one that you would use for both of them, and that's the Russian objectives. So at the time they collapse, at that very time, not at the end of the turn, but at the time of the collapse, you count up the points. And here, like you look there, one's called key terrain, and you can get up to 3 points. So basically, if you have control of Crimea, Kiev, Warsaw, Transcaucasia, Western Ukraine, Primorsky Krai, Archangelsk, if you own 3 of those, you can get up to those 3 points. And they have all of those, but they can't get points for every single one of them. They can only get a maximum of 3. And the other one is expand the empire. You get 1 victory objective if you have any land zone that you possess that you didn't have at the start of the game. And there is one of those as well. Let's just take a look over here. So this one here, they own this one, East Prussia. I'm just looking here. Yeah, you see it's worth 2 IPP. And it's got to be worth at least an IPP. Like, you couldn't just take a territory that wasn't worth anything and call it a day. It had to be something that you didn't have at the start of the game that's worth something as far as IPP value goes. So anyway, that's really all you need. And you would write down, how many points you got. So at the end of the game, those totals for the Russians would go towards the Allies. That's the British and the French and the Americans. You would add the Russian points with those ones, and that's their total points at the end of the game. So let's play the Russian Revolution expansion set though. So what you would do here, we've already done the first part of it, and that is go through that whole turn where you don't get to do anything, right? And then the next part, the Central Powers have to leave 1 land unit in every territory that they had at like where they are right now. So here, Germany has to keep a unit in there. And one of the things I had forgotten, I had moved a guy out of here. So before the video started, I took a guy from here and put it over here. And then there was already a guy here. Now I can move one of these guys out of this territory on this turn if I'd like. But you have to leave 1 guy in each territory that you own, at least 1 unit. I say 1 guy, but that's what I mean, right? 1 unit in order to collect that territory. So then you would give up your money at the end of the turn. You would give that to the Germans, and the Germans could use that right away. And then you get to count up all your units that you have on the board, all the Russian units, and then you would cut that in half, rounding up. So and you would get that's the units that you would get to set on the board. Now with the Red Army here, it's called now, they're going to get the maximum amount of infantry that they were allowed, which is 14. They had less than 28, so they're going to get 14. They're going to get 6 militia. They didn't have 12, so the 6 was the minimum. They're going to get a plane. They're going to get 2 Cossacks. They had 3 on the board, so that's the amount they would have gotten anyway. They're going to get 3 cavalry. They did not have any cavalry on the board. And then this is the only thing where they're going to get extra. They had 7 artillery, and the minimum they could get is 3. But if you take half of 7 and round up, then that's 4. So the only thing they're going to get extra, more than the standard amount, would be 1 extra artillery, and that's what they're going to get. But then for the other side, there's a setup chart, and we haven't published that yet. We were kind of hoping we could find somebody to do a nice job of it, but we haven't. So we'll probably just put it out as is. But anyway, it tells you what to set up. So you've got you've got Poland here. There's the 3, and you can see the shade here is a little lighter, right? So Poland is this territory, and this territory, and for them they've got an infantry on each and 1 cavalry here as well, right? There's also Finland, and Finland has an infantry on each of their territories plus an artillery there. And then there's Ukraine, and Ukraine has 6 territories, and they've got an armored train there. They've got a couple of infantry. They've got an artillery. They've got a cavalry. This doesn't matter. The factory doesn't matter. I just left it there. That was the old Russian factory. But they don't need factories to put stuff on. They're not going to have an income or anything. I'll explain how the mechanics of the Russian Civil War works later. Probably when we're playing it. I don't know if I'll mention it in this video or not. But you're not going to need factories for that. And then the main combatant against the Red Army will be the White Army. And you can see there's various white troops around the board there. And they're represented by the Russian flag. What would you'd recognize as the current Russian flag. That Russian flag is actually from the 1800s. I think it was the Imperial Standard of the Tsar. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, they've got different territories. And you can see here there's also another marker on there. This one says British control on it. So you can use those markers, or instead of using those markers, you could also use British roundel instead. And you're going to need for all the different countries, but you've already got them for all the different countries if you've got the roundels to play this game, right? And so if you look at it here, like this is a little more difficult to see, this is a little easier to see. So if you're just playing with people and and you're not playing over the internet or anything, then this would be fine for sure. But if you're playing over the internet, maybe you want to do it this way. I don't know. It's totally up to you, right? Because then people could see it better on video, right? And Doug, in his infinite wisdom, has decided that these things will be sold separately. So he'll sell you a whole set of these if you want to use these, right? But if you don't want to, then you can just use the roundels that you have, and you don't have to pay for these as part of the Russian Revolution expansion set. In that way, he can try to keep the costs down for you, right? So that's a pretty good idea. I kind of like both ways. There's an advantage to both. Like these things are smaller, so they'll fit in the territory better. But at the same time, you could always go like this as well, right? And then say, which one's control? Oh, yeah, it's British control. Okay. There's various ways you can do it. You just figure out the way that that you like and that makes sense for you. So those guys will be British controlled. We've also got German controlled. Like Germany is going to be controlling the Polish ones. Because they have the roundel on here, I didn't bother putting one of these markers on. I just left the roundel on there, right? And the Austro-Hungarians, they will be controlling Ukraine. So I didn't bother putting the Austro-Hungarian round marker on there, like you see one over here, because I just know that Ukraine is controlled by them. And I thought, why bother putting the marker on? I already know who controls them, right? I mean, I could put it on if I wanted to. It wouldn't be a problem. But anyway, that's what their marker looks like. And this is a white territory controlled by the Austro-Hungarians. And then down at the bottom there, this is a white territory controlled by the Ottomans. Because the Ottomans owned that, I went right ahead and put the roundel on there so that they could collect for that territory, right? The one thing that I should do, I should probably change this guy. Remember this guy here now. This is a strict neutral territory now, or a strict neutral nation, actually. It was a random event that happened quite recently. I think it was in the last round that that happened. I should, just find some kind of roundel to put on there. You know what? Let me just grab one. Well, let's do that. That guy's bothering me. He looks like a white army. All right, there we go. Let's give this guy his own country. There we go. Now I feel special. Okay, so that's kind of weird that happened, but normally that just wouldn't have anything. There's also Red Army roundels, and I just didn't bother putting them on there. Like this is the old Russian roundel, right? And so if there's a territory on here that doesn't have a roundel on it, that means it belongs to the Red Army. And so that would be all of these yellow ones here. And you can put the Red Army roundel on there. There's tons of them though. Like it's going to cost you a few bucks. Looks like just about 20 bucks to do that. Or I mean 20 roundels to do that. So that's going to cost you a few bucks if you want to do that. And I don't really like doing that because this area of the board's something, like I like to put my battle board down there. And so I don't want a whole bunch of roundels on there. So there's one other thing that you need to do as well. Now, Petrograd has been the capital of the Russian Empire, or imperialist Russia, the whole game. Now that the Soviets have taken over, the capital moves to Moscow, and you would put this roundel on there, and this roundel comes with the expansion set, and that makes this your new capital now. The Soviet capital, Moscow, and it's been their capital ever since, hasn't it? So anyway, that's we've seen those guys over there. I think there's just this over here to look at. So as long as the Japanese are on the Allies, you can set a Japanese guy down here as well. This is U.S. control, so you've got a white infantry, an American infantry, and a Japanese infantry with a U.S. control marker. If Japan is part of the Central Powers, then the Japanese infantry doesn't go down there. Anyway, so now that you've got all that set up, and like I said, there's an actual setup chart for all of this stuff, right? Then it's time for the Soviet player to set this stuff up. And they can set them up anywhere they want on Soviet territories, right? And then once that's done, well, then you can begin the turn. So then you would move into the random events portion. There is a couple of Siam, I think. We got to give away Siam this turn. Greece is already gone, so Greece does not get a line, but Siam does. And we roll for the Chinese. And that's just because it's summer of 1917, and that's what we happen to do on this turn. But anyway, that's how you begin this. And you would, on each player's turn, you would play this, and we'll get into that. Like when the Germans take their turn, and then the British go and everything, then we'll see how this works. There's no point in explaining it all to you now because I'll just be re-explaining it later when I do it. But basically, the ones with all the control markers, German controlled, Austrian controlled, British controlled, you go on their turns. You'll take that turn, and there'll be recruitment rolls and lend-lease and things like that. And you're going to want a lend-lease because you don't want the Soviets taking over, right? Too easily. If you don't lend-lease anything over there, then the Soviets are going to have you over a barrel. And the last thing is, when the Russian turn comes along, then it's like the Chinese turn. You know, when you flip over 3 cards, well, we have a Russian Civil War deck. And this comes with the Russian Civil War expansion set as well. And there's 2 different kinds of cards. You see the black fist on that one there? It's a partisan fist. It's the international symbol of partisans. We put that on there. That's for the Russian revolution. So while the war is going on, you only use these cards. There's 36 cards in total, so you'll separate these 18 cards from the other ones, and you'll shuffle them up, and you'll only play with those ones. And then there's 18 more cards there, and you see here, they don't have the fist on them. So those would be the Civil War cards. They're basically the same thing, except for there's a fist on them or no fist on them. So once the war ends, and whenever that is, it could be the standard ending that you would use if you're playing it that way, or it could be the variable role ending. Whenever it ends, then you take the cards without the fists and you shuffle them into the cards with the fists that are left. Like you have a discard pile, right? So you pull 3 cards, and okay, you do whatever that says. And then the next one, okay, you do whatever that says. And the next one, okay, you do whatever that says. And it's the same as the other ones, like the other random events. If you can do it, you have to do it. But if you can't do it, then just discard that card and grab another card and replace it. But you have to pull 3 cards every turn and do whatever that says. And then the Soviets take their turn, just like what happens in China there. Where the Chinese, they flip over the cards. Okay, we're done the cards. Now it's time, and you buy your units, and you take your moves and everything, and you play your turn, right? So that's how that works. Anyway, I think that's all I need to mention about this. You know, we'll be talking about it as we play it. So let's just cut it off here, and we will get to the random events for this turn. Okay, so it's random event time. Let me just move the clock. Summer 1917. And here we go. So this is for the West. 1. You know what? We're not going to do that, because that's the one we got last time. It's Russia falls apart. Russia has already fallen apart. So let's try again. 2. All right. Okay, British labour strikes. Britain pays 3 IPP to the bank. British medium and minor factories produce no units this turn. British major factories produce a maximum of 1 unit each. Okay, well that's going to hurt us. So we've got 2 major factories in the home country there. Like we've been using this one so much, we're not going to be able to use it. That's probably the one that's going to hurt us the most. And also, 3 IPPs off. Let me just go get that before I forget. Okay, so the British are down to 48 now. So, time for the East. 2. Okay, let me just move that up. Japanese treachery. I wonder what that's all about. Okay. Japan must move 2 unaligned, not level 4 minor powers down to neutral on the diplomacy chart from a major power within their alliance, even if it is their own controlling major power. Ooh. Move 2 unaligned. Okay. Just looking to see if there's a level they must be at, but there isn't. So, let's see, France, United States, Britain. You know what, let's move this one down, and this one here, both from Britain. That's Afghanistan and someplace in Saudi Arabia there. Let me just see what that one is. This one here, a seed emirate of Azir. Okay, we'll move those ones down. So that's the random events. Now, what's next? Alignment. Okay. Now, we've already, we won't be aligning Greece. It's supposed to be Greece and Siam this turn. But obviously Greece is already gone. So, take this guy and the boat off, and we'll put a pie on, and a torpedo boat destroyer, and a militia. And Japan goes up in IPP. So they're up to 16 IPP, which means 8, because they've got to cut it in half, right? Okay. Then the last thing we have to do here is China. We see if China aligns to the Allies. So on a roll of 1 to 10, China is going to align with the Allies. On a roll of 11 or 12, China will not align. Okay? And let's see. 9. So China does align. And that does have some consequences, believe it or not. Here, let me see. I'm just going to put these on here, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. Okay, the American one is already there. All right, that makes it easier. And the Russians, too bad for them, they are not aligned with us, so they're not part of the Allies anymore. Okay, so what happens when China becomes aligned is that all of the Allies get to move to level 3. I guess you would also move Japan and Italy on there too, wouldn't you? I'll check into that, but I think you do. I'll just make sure that it doesn't say major powers. So what that means is that they have improved recruitment. And okay, so improved recruitment available on level 3 of improved factories. Each manpower icon in each city you own is increased by 1. You no longer have to pay a manpower when you build or upgrade a factory. You subtract 1 manpower value from the factory build requirement. So if you were to build a major factory upgrade, I think it costs 2, so it would only cost 1, or maybe it costs 3. Whatever it is, you get to take 1 manpower that you pay off of that. When you build factories in this game, you don't just pay IPPs, you also have to use your manpower for a turn to do that. Anyway, so that's what it is. And the reason for this is China is aligned with the Allies. China in World War I did send people over to Europe to work for the Allies. The Allies wouldn't let them fight. I'm not going to get into the reasons for that. Let's just say they were nefarious, but they would let them work for them. So they were busy building, digging trenches, and ferrying supplies back and forth through those trenches. Anyway, so that's what it boils down to, is that the Allies get the Chinese manpower, and because of that, the Allies are at 3 and have improved manpower for that. Anyway, so that's it. So I'm going to cut it off here. This is just going to be, I don't even know if it's a short video or not, but that's this video. In the next video, we will get to Germany's turn in the summer of 1917 and beyond. Take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.